Welcome to the show, folks. I'm your host, John DeBona, and this is where we cut through the noise and break down the real issues facing our country. Today, we're diving into Project 2025, a dangerous plan that will strip away health protections, dismantle essential agencies, and leave us vulnerable in future crises. Let's get right into it. The truth about COVID is clear, and the dangers are real. We're going to walk you through the key issues that continue to affect public health and safety. At the end of this video, we'll show you how to take action. But before we get started, go to your preferred social media platforms and make sure to subscribe to turnleftpack.org and check out our COVID Reels series. Project 2025 will strip protections that keep Americans safe. We must resist Project 2025. Project 2025 bans future mask and vaccine mandates on pages 19 and 475, undermines the CDC and NIH's public health measures on page 454, and strips OSHA's authority to enforce workplace safety protections on page 886. This leaves Americans vulnerable in schools, workplaces, and during pandemics. Project 2025 bans masks and vaccines during pandemics, leaving schools and workplaces vulnerable. It's not about safety, it's about politics. Project 2025 doesn't protect Americans. It leaves us exposed in times of crisis. This isn't just dangerous, it's reckless. Well, joining me today is Scott Simmons to walk us through this ongoing crisis and the critical protections that are being removed. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, good to see you. I guess, maybe before we get started, it probably is good for me to explain a little bit of my background. My career was actually in software, but my entire collegiate and post bachelor work was all in biology and science. So I've got a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of California. I participated in a multiple-month internship at the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the NIH, National Institutes of Health, back in Bethesda, Maryland. I've got a Master's of Science with a focus on genetics and biochemistry. I was an adjunct professor both at the junior college level as well as the four-year college level. And my focus actually over my career, and actually one of my hobbies that I still spend a lot of time dealing with, is genetics, virology, microbiology, and biochemistry. So I come at this as somewhat a pretty well-learned individual as it relates to public health and just overall disease conditions and whatnot.
I can't thank you enough for being here, Scott. Let's dive in. Why is it dangerous to threaten schools with funding cuts over vaccine mandates, especially when protecting children from preventable diseases?
Yeah, well, and if you go back to the 1960s, when we really started kind of this onrush with vaccines and making sure that school children were vaccinated against things like smallpox and like polio and like measles. We really did a great service for both education as well as public health in general. I mean, we basically curtailed those diseases. Banning masks and vaccine mandates during pandemics is going to be a recipe for disaster. Banning federal funding to make sure that we get these shots in the arms of the kid is also a recipe for disaster. Imagine what would have happened around the world if we hadn't instituted these policies during COVID. We would have seen millions more dying and seriously ill, likely a global economic depression. As it was, the number of deaths and the effect on the world economy was devastating, but it could have been so much worse. The sad fact is we have leaders that don't believe in science. This is, ending up moving into policy areas. For example, what we're just talking about, taking away funding from schools. Trump didn't enforce masks at the Supreme Court announcement of Amy Coney Bryant. It became a super spreader event with Congress people, with Supreme Court justices, all being exposed to COVID. And then when he contracted COVID, he didn't even wear a mask, kind of like looking at a solar eclipse without protection. The fact is that this is a real bonehead approach. Ignorance of science is done at your own peril. This gave a pass to the MAGA sheep to do the same, caused many to avoid the vaccine, caused many to basically stipulate that their children weren't going to go ahead and get those vaccines. According to a fall 2023 survey, 22% of American adults said they were unvaccinated against COVID-19. 34% being Republicans, 9% being Democrats. So we kind of know where things sit from a standpoint of political parties and persuasion, and much of that is because of Trump. Project 2025, where are we at? Well, Project 2025 made the following statement, that COVID-19, exposed the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, as perhaps the most incompetent and arrogant agency in the federal government. Quite the contrary, from my perspective. CDC should be held up, as well as the NIH and Dr. Fauci, as heroes. The amount and number of deaths that we would have had if we hadn't instituted these measures would have been huge. So there's this ongoing drumbeat that we hear on from anti-vaxxers, RFK Jr., Trump, other science illiterate idiots. If Project 2025 comes into play, Trump and Project 2025 have already, there are provisions in there to eliminate the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, to eliminate the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which basically provides the recommendations for state and local governments to issue vaccine mandates and vaccine recommendations, and likely as well the Vaccines for Children program, which has been huge in terms of helping us to wipe out diseases like diphtheria and measles. Medicare is going to be impacted as well. Medicare beneficiaries are going to lose their no-cost access to vaccines. It's going to increase healthcare costs, jeopardize their health, particularly affecting people of color, people with lower incomes. Public health agencies are going to stop requiring vaccinations in school children, which is going to lead to more outbreaks and potentially mutations of the viruses. And then, that in conjunction with parents pushing to eliminate state and local vaccine mandates at schools. And then finally, Trump coming ahead in June, just a few months ago, June 2024, and saying that, any school that has a vaccine mandate will not get federal funding. Probably impossible, probably a Trump mouth fart, but nonetheless, something to be very, very concerned about. We're in for a frightening future if Project 2025 comes to pass.
Indeed. Oh, gosh. Thank you so much for that research, Scott. And what you said, by threatening funding cuts, schools are pressured into abandoning vaccine mandates, which puts both the children and their communities at a greater risk of outbreaks of preventable diseases. So how does eliminating the CDC specifically as a recommending body for vaccines impact public health?
Well, as I kind of alluded to in the earlier answer, the CDC becomes kind of the way station for disease control. Obviously, they're present in the name. Plus, also, they maintain kind of a forward-looking view in terms of potential viruses or particular, medical challenges or crises that may be appearing in the future. So, we kind of lose our early warning system, which is a huge issue of not having the CDC, but also we lose their capabilities and their deep background in terms of doing vaccine analysis and, working with the FDA to approve vaccinations like the COVID vaccine. So, if we continue to see, mask and vaccine mandates challenged and, issues with CDC coming under like funding issues or potentially elimination, we're in for a scary future. Vaccination is one of the most cost-effective ways to go ahead and, have cost-effective healthcare and public health interventions. There's strong evidence that by going ahead and paying for this or subsidizing it, it's obviously going to reduce out-of-pocket costs, which improves vaccination rates. So it's a circle that feeds. It's a positive feedback loop. The IRA, for example, went ahead, guaranteed nearly 54 million Medicare Part D beneficiaries, like myself, had access to free vaccines. So if we go back to the days of COVID, if we go back to, looking at how the disease manifests itself and the work that the CDC did, if we had gone ahead and listened to Trump with COVID, we would have been injecting bleach. We would have been spending all day outside trying to get sunshine to kill the virus, taking, hydroxychloroquine, which is a medicine to deworm cows and horses. It's one thing for the unfortunate MAGA folks to become ill due to a lack of, proven preventative measures for both COVID and other viruses, and just because they're stupid. But this mindset is going to affect the innocent. It's going to lead to outbreaks across the globe, potentially lead to mutations in the virus over time. Imagine the outcome of a virus mutating into a deadly pathogen across a large population. Imagine what would happen if we hadn't taken the steps that we did with COVID. We would have had millions of deaths. The fact is that the CDC and the vaccine saved about 3 million Americans' lives. Those that didn't follow the recommendation did so at their own peril. And it's estimated there were about 250,000 people, give or take, that decided they didn't want the vaccine. Well, see you later, alligator. Imperial College in the UK went ahead and they've estimated that had there not been preventative measures like masks and like vaccine mandates and the work of the CDC, that the outbreak of COVID would have likely caused over 40 million more deaths worldwide, 40 million. But what's even more troubling, in 1991, Americans were almost unanimous in their feelings about vaccines being required for children, 81% to 14%. And yet, when the same survey was done last year, vaccinations against contagious diseases like measles, now just 51 to 45%. So, last year, we saw this pushback resulting in the, more than 300 cases of measles. And those measles cases are not easily rectified. So as we move away from mask and vaccine mandates, we're going to see increased symptoms. I mean, thank God that I had my COVID shot prior to getting COVID, because at 67 years of age, I would have had severe symptoms and potentially, long-term COVID as a result of that. The other thing that happens is it allows us to pass the contagion on to other folks, other school children, for example, in the case of school kids. The CDC, as they begin to go ahead and figure out what that vaccine strategy should be, they take this stuff into account. And then lastly, as a secondary impact, the economy basically would have been tortured. But what probably concerns me more as a student of biology is that without vaccines, we run the risk of a virus mutating across a large population as a pandemic. Think about the impact of a new fatal smallpox or measles virus that ends up out there because, in fact, we don't have the coverage rate on immunizations that we need to have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, banning mandates, obviously, and dismantling the CDC's role doesn't protect freedoms. It undermines public safety. And after the break, we're going to talk about how Project 2025 even goes further by targeting the National Institutes of Health.
When I ran for Congress, we flipped more Trump voters blue than any other congressional race in the country. We did this by calling out the GOP's lies and speaking truth against their $1 million attack ads. I've now partnered with Turn Left, and we're taking the fight to the extremists like Marge the Trainwreck Green, Ted Cruz, and Josh Hawley, to name a few. And I'm asking each and every one of you all to donate $25 today to the group that is absolutely helping to send these jackaloons packing. It's time to speak truth to power and turn left.
Well, Project 2025 goes further by not only targeting the CDC, but the NIH for implementing public health measures during COVID pandemics. This weakens their ability to respond effectively to future crises. Scott, what happens when the NIH loses its authority to guide scientific research?
Well, I think some of this, John, goes kind of hand in hand with what we just talked about with the CDC. This overall anti-regulation movement has implications across society, but especially as it relates to public health. The Chevron decision by the Supreme Court, which actually occurred earlier this year, has some pretty dramatic impacts that it's going to affect on regulatory agents, such as the CDC and the NIH. As noted earlier, the CDC may go away. It's one of the quote unquote provisions of Project 2025. And although the Chevron decision really is more focused on the EPA, the ruling is loose enough so it's going to have implications across our government, to include the CDC and the NIH. In short, the Chevron decision allows lower courts to pass judgment individually on regulations in areas that are often quite technical and in which judges involved have no expertise. I mean, I don't know of a judge that has a master's degree in biochem, for example. So imagine what would have happened had a judge reviewed the 800 plus pages to approve the mRNA COVID vaccines. It never would have gotten done. Or in fact, it would have been done in such a way that it never would have had any teeth in it. So at a minimum, the Chevron decision and this whole impact on regulatory behavior, it's going to translate into risk and cost for all parties. It's going to result in decisions that are going to leave the public exposed to preventable health risks and potentially lead to massive deaths in the general population should we encounter another medical crisis like we did with COVID. A little bit of history for you. In the days before vaccines, polio paralyzed thousands of children. Rubella, German measles, caused thousands of cases of crippling birth defects. Diphtheria was the #1 killer of teenagers, and novel bacteria infections led to thousands of cases of meningitis and bloodstream infections. And this occurred year after year after year. Do we want to return to this? I don't think so. So the remarkable speed that we witnessed in the development of the COVID vaccine and overall success in treating COVID was directly related to the many years of science research that were funded by the NIH and carried out underneath the auspices of the CDC, an effort that should be applauded, not vilified. And to me, it was equivalent of our moonshot in 1969. So what's going to happen in the next health crisis if Project 2025 comes to pass? Will we be slow to act like the Trump administration was initially? Will we see people trying to use unproven, unworkable solutions? Will we be lucky? And a lot of what happened with COVID was luck. Certainly we had things in place, but the speed with which we were able to go ahead and produce that vaccine and move it out to the general population is simply stunning. And that was directly as a result of the success of the CDC and the NIH. So the tragedy is going to be that many people are going to be lost as we fumble around for a solution. Without the NIH, without the CDC, we were lucky with COVID that it was not more virulent. We were lucky that we were able to develop the vaccines and treatment solutions like Paxlovid in short order. Next time, we may not be so lucky. One bright spot, though, for you, if we do this in exchange for vaccine and mask freedom, we will see a noticeable increase in business for funeral homes and crematoriums. Sorry, bad joke.
No, that was pretty fitting. It fits because if the NIH is control over scientific research is broken, it opens the door for politically motivated research agenda, which undermines integrity and slows progress. So how does Project 2025 address concerns about vaccine production being tied to fetal cells, and what are the dangers of such claims?
Well, once again, I think in this case, we're calling out one really important thing, which is how we produce, vaccines going forward, and this is obviously being impacted as well by the pro-life movement. I think all of these things, John, it comes back to an issue of a general distrust or mistrust of government, along with some kind of antiquated ideas about, health and women's health rights, et cetera, et cetera. Somehow we've gotten to this point where we have this disbelief in science with a focus on like unfounded conspiracy theories. I'll be frank, I don't understand how science has become a political issue. How we are willing to trade like collateral damage of people being dead or injured or economic damage for these like bizarre kind of like moral things that Project 2025 is pretty well recognized for. When I grew up watching the space program in the 60s, I was amazed by science. It's the reason I chose to major in science. But I think one of the issues that we've got right now, John, and it's correlated to the question you asked, but I want to address it here, and that is both science and math have been, avoided by many students in high school. I wasn't avoiding it, but but the lack of education in these areas, it is clear that our population has missed some key lessons. And now we're witnessing payback. That this whole ignorance on science, combined with this fractured definition of freedom, those that oppose masks and vaccines, and are trying to basically institute these checkpoints on vaccine production and whatnot. They claim it's an issue of freedom. Freedom to live their lives without government intervention. Well, the problem with that is that the selfish approach to personal freedom impacts others. And when we're dealing with a pandemic, as those infected spread the viruses to others without concerns, it's a huge issue. And to make it even worse, these same people will ignore science in favor of conspiracy theories. The disinformation leading to the public lynching of Dr. Fauci and his work to increase awareness and to contradict the lies and the crazy solutions proposed by Trump and his team. As a question, I wonder, how many Trumpsters died during the COVID crisis because they listened to Trump and other naysayers? Worse yet, how many innocent people did they take with them as they exercised their freedom? So the bottom line is, as we begin to look at this thing, leaders are pushing attacks against these institutions, and they're doing it on multiple fronts. They're honestly uneducated oafs, but the sad issue is that they're not endangering themselves. It's likely that they're going to injure or kill many others and many innocent others in the process. So we need to continue to implement and enforce good public health measures and good research and development procedures to protect our citizens, especially health workers and our most vulnerable communities, youth, elderly, people of color, economically disadvantaged. We've got to return to a time when we believed and trusted in science, not these misguided conspiracies.
Indeed. Attacking the CDC and the NIH weakens our ability to respond to public health crises, putting more lives at risk. After the break, we'll discuss how Project 2025 strips away safety protections.
Today, we have an amazing show for you. Join myself, special guests, and celebrities.
What's going on, Ice-T? Andrew Yang.
Somebody else was hopping on.
Oh, hold on.
What's going on, Battle?
As we roast GQP Jackaloons.
He may not be a real businessman, but he is one hell of a con artist.
That's what it is. That's what they got indicted for. Treason and sedition.
And addresses the headlines of the day.
They must be held accountable.
Live streaming every night.
I got more time in a friggin' port in a friggin' combat zone than you probably got in the military.
This is Ojeda Live.
Well, finally tonight, Project 2025 strips OSHA of its authority to enforce workplace safety protections, including those related to health crises like COVID-19. Scott, how does removing OSHA's authority endanger workplace safety in the face of future health crises?
Yeah, thanks, John. So, let's start with, what OSHA's mandate is. So, OSHA's real responsibility is to provide for workplace safety, as well as a number of other, worker protections. So, it basically sits on multiple different layers. In Project 2025, in the afterword, this is a quote, they being the future government, they must rein in agencies such as the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which the Biden administration weaponized in an attempt to force COVID-19 vaccine mandates on 84 million Americans through their workplaces. Here comes that freedom thing again, guys. Fact is, though, it's more than just immunizations that are going to be affected. Okay. The Chevron decision, which we just talked about in the earlier segment, it's going to have a huge impact both on OSHA and workplace safety as profit-hungry corporations fight against regulations to protect the safety of their workers. This is a greater issue than just COVID. It means that any danger in the workplace is subject to judicial review by judges with no expertise to determine the extent of the danger. Let's think back to the mining industry and the meatpacking industry back, last century, prior to unions. So the dangers in these jobs led to frequent injuries and deaths as a result of limited, oftentimes non-existent regulatory oversight. Unions and OSHA changed that. But now we're seeing a movement away from worker protections. And it's actually going to impact a lot more than just workplace safety. It's going to impact child labor laws. Project 2025 seeks to roll back child labor protections. The document states, another quote, some young adults show an interest in inherently dangerous jobs, unquote. Huh? It calls on the Department of Labor, Project 2025, to allow teenagers to work in these jobs with proper training and parental consent. The plan actually discusses eliminating federal rules that protect children from working in mines, meatpacking plants, and other dangerous workplaces. I mean, excuse me? Shit. So it seeks to exempt small businesses as well and first-time and what they're calling non-willful violators from OSHA fines, and then only to focus inspections on what they call egregious offenders, ones that have done this habitually. You know, it only takes one safety issue to kill somebody or to kill a bunch of people. So, you know, God, we've made so much progress in reining in workplace safety over the last 100 years. I feel, and I think fear, that we're going to see a huge number of regulations thrown out by the court. The results can be huge in terms of worker safety, leading to injuries and probably a lot of deaths. We must not let this happen.
Oh my goodness. Without OSHA's oversight, businesses will have little incentive to implement safety measures, increasing the risk of illness and death in the workplace during future pandemics. So, what broader implications does this move have on labor protections and workers' rights?
Yeah, well, you know, and obviously our focus, John, has been, you know, workplace safety, and obviously a lot of focus on COVID and what might happen if the next pandemic happens and Project 2025 is in place. As we begin to look at just the workplace in general, it's yet another one of these just radical arms of Project 2025. Project 2025 doesn't just stop with workplace safety. No, it's so much more, you know. Sure, I mean, it's going to strip OSHA's ability to create regulations to ensure worker safety, and it's going to strip away, you know, economic protections that'll include things like overtime wages and collective bargaining. But it even goes further than that. It basically weakens the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board's watchdog role, making it harder to form and to create a union. It pushes for a ban on all public employee unions, to include teacher unions. It allows states to ban unions entirely. So now we've had 28 states, you know, just yet one more, 28 states have enacted legislation to weaken child labor laws. And we've seen an 88% increase in cases where children were found to be employed in violation of child labor laws. I could let you guess whether it's red states or blue states that are prone to this, but we won't go there. The fact is, this is going to get worse with 2025 and a Trump administration. It's going to replace the union's high quality training and apprenticeship programs with lower quality, probably substandard training designed to benefit corporations and basically pad the bottom line at the expense of doing appropriate training. It's going to further diminish OSHA's ability to penalize corporations that consistently violate workplace regulations. I mean, even now, OSHA is far too constrained. You know, penalties often amount to no more than just slap on the wrist. $100,000, $200,000 at the most, and that's even if, you know, you've got a severe injury or death. You know, I mean, GM, Chevron, Exxon, you know, $200,000, that's nothing. So it's clear we have a huge choice to make in November. Do we go back to the earlier days when coal mines had no regulations? Meat packers regularly lost arms and legs in the course of their career. And, you know, we basically had kids that we were sending down in coal mines in Kentucky to go ahead and dig for black coal and get black lung disease at the same time. Do we do that, or do we continue to protect workers from harm as we've done so successfully over the last 100 years? But we need to even do a better job on that. We got to move forward, guys, not backwards. Your vote in November is critical to making this happen.
Absolutely. Removing OSHA's authority is a direct attack on worker safety. And we'll conclude with how you can take action to resist these dangerous policies next. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show. To recap, Project 2025 bans essential health mandates, weakens the CDC and the NIH, and strips workplace protections. These aren't just political moves. They put lives at risk. Visit turnleftpac.org and sign up for our emails. You can request a letter template to send to your representatives in Congress, telling them to protect public health institutions and worker safety. Share this video, tag someone who needs to hear the truth, like and subscribe, and stay tuned next for Ojeda Live.